It's so weird. Okay. Herein comes the value of intellectual effort in the pursuit of the divine wisdom. The intellect cannot give us perception of the truths we are seeking. This comes only from the light of the Buddhi. But it can prepare the ground for acquiring that perception by gathering essential intellectual material and working upon it with great concentration and earnestness, and with the set purpose of finding those truths which are hidden behind the ideas. In thus straining perseveringly to go beyond the ideas, consciousness becomes more and more free from the obscuring influence of intellect and acquires in increasing measure the direct perception of those truths. Before we begin to clarify ideas about the absolute, we must remind ourselves of the tremendous limitations under which we are undertaking this difficult but fascinating task. We are trying to understand through the instrumentality of the intellect the reality which is not only beyond the range of the intellect, but beyond the range of Buddhi and Atma, and even beyond the range of the experiences of those high adepts who can dive even deeper into the recesses of their own consciousness. We are trying to peer into a mystery which is called the ever-darkness and the unknowable, and can only hope that a faint glimmer of light from the deeper recesses of our being will be able to filter down into our minds, at least partially satisfy our hunger for this knowledge, and perhaps draw us a little nearer to that reality which is shrouded in impenetrable mystery. If we are conscious of our tremendous limitations and regard our efforts merely as trying to get information about a country with the help of a map, and not to know it in any case of the term, we may be able to maintain the right attitude of reverence and humility. It is only the way of avoiding the error in which the ordinary scholar or divine falls when he mistakes his intellectual knowledge for real knowledge, and on the basis of this begins to consider himself superior to those who do not even have this knowledge. Consciousness of our ignorance is the beginning of wisdom, and the first step towards acquiring true knowledge. There's no... What the hell, dude? Man, what is going on with my... That's it. There is no greater enemy of real knowledge than complacency, which completely stops our progress by making us live in a world of false and illusory security and satisfactions. Although, for the sake of convenience in dealing with the subject, we have separated the concept of the absolute from the other two concepts, namely those of the dual father-mother principle and the triple unmanifest cosmic logos, which should remember that all the three together are the ever unmanifest and really constitute one indivisible, impenetrable mystery which lies at the basis of the manifested universe. Therefore, after we have considered the three aspects of the unmanifested separately, we should take them together and bring about their relationships, integrate them into one concept which is self-contained and a harmonious whole. In considering the nature of the absolute, as far as this is possible within the realm of the intellect, it would be of great help if we first consider a few facts and natural phenomenon by which their analogous relationships can give us some insight into these mystery of mysteries. By a strange irony of circumstances, these facts have been provided by science, which, owing to its hostility to the doctrines of religion and philosophy, was generally considered an enemy by orthodox adherents of religion and philosophy. These and other instances of this nature show how the discoveries of science, instead of being prejudicial to the occult doctrine, are really of great help in enabling us to understand and appreciate that doctrine. This is also because the phenomenon in the lower worlds are shadows of reality in the higher, and by examining and understanding the shadows below, we can sometimes gain a clue or get a glimpse into the nature of the realities above. It is this fact which made one of the adepts say, "Science is our greatest ally." Truth has nothing to fear from any quarter, least of all from science, which is also devoted to the discovery of truth. although at a much lower level and in a very limited field. If some things are proved wrong in some of the minor occult doctrines or in the investigations made by occultists, it is good that they are proved wrong in the interests of greater truth, for the occultist also, like the scientists, wants truth and nothing but the truth. The first of the natural phenomenon which we shall briefly consider is the dispersion of white light by a prism as shown in Figure 1. Those who have knowledge of even elementary science are familiar with the experiment in which a beam of light is passed through a prism and the emergent beam screen allowed to fall on a white screen. The image which is produced is not that of the original beam, but we get a band of colors which is called a spectrum. If the original beam of white light was derived from the sun, then there is also an invisible spectrum on either side of the visible spectrum, which is called infrared and ultraviolet. What has happened is that same beam of white light has been dispersed or differentiated by the prism and all the vibrations, visible and invisible, which have been separated from each other, according to the wavelengths, forming a continuous spectrum. By putting another inverted prism in the path of the emergent rays, it is possible to recombine or integrate them again into the original beam of light, so the whole process is reversible. Let us now note a few facts about this simple experiment which will throw some light on the problem we are considering. The first point we note is that it is possible to integrate a graded series of things in a perfectly balanced state in which none of the individual things is present as such, but it is possible to get all the constituent things by differentiation. Considering the phenomenon further, we see that the conditions prevailing on the two sides of the prism are entirely different. On the side of which the light enters the prism, we have only the integrated white light and no color, as such, and on the side of which it leaves the prism, there are only two colors and no white light. If there is an entity who has lived only on the side of colors and has never been to the other side, he cannot have the slightest idea of what white light is like from the experience of different colors, although they are all derived from white light. He will have to pass through the prism and emerge on the other side to realize that white light is like. And also, if he has always been in the realm of white light, he can have no real experience and not even idea of colors, as long as he does not pass into the realm of colors. The two experiences seem to be mutually exclusive. Another fact that we should note is that the wholeness of the incident white light is not destroyed when its progress is passed through the prism and is broken up into colors on the other side. The white light on the side of incidence is not affected by what happens on the other side of emergence, because it is not static, but a dynamic phenomenon ever renewing itself. The significance of this light phenomenon and its various aspects in enabling us to understand to some extent the nature of the absolute in a very general way is quite obvious, and we need not go into it beyond pointing out the analogies which are self-evident. We can see at once how the absolute itself can be without any attributes, though it is the source of all those principles, tattvas, forces which invest all things in the realm of the manifest with attributes. To a world which knows only colors, the absence of colors can only be interpreted as darkness, and not as white light, which is fundamentally different from darkness, for darkness means the complete absence of colors, while white light means the presence of all colors, but in an integrated form. So it is easy to see how the absolute is said to be without any attributes whatsoever, the ever darkness, or the Nirguna Brahman. Again, we see how it is impossible to know a principle or reality from which a series of derivatives have been obtained by differentiation until we can transcend the realm of these derivatives and emerge into the realm of the parent principle. We must transcend the realm of particulars if we are to know, and not merely conceive, the archetype from which they are derived. We must leave the world of shadows if we are to know the realities which cast these shadows. We must leave the world of the mind if we are to know consciousness in its purity. And lastly, we must leave the world of relativity if we are to know the absolute, if that is at all possible. The reverse of this position is perhaps also true in another sense, and may provide a clue to the question why the monad has descended into the lower worlds to gain the necessary experience for his mysterious unfoldment. Living as he has always done in the bosom of the Father in the bright radiance of only white light, he must now come down into the world of manifestation where alone he can find the colors which are obtained by the differentiation of that white light. And since this can be done only through the instrumentality of a proper mechanism on the lower planes, he must get involved in the building up and use of that mechanism. It is this, we may take it, that necessitates his evolution on the lower planes. Let us try to look at this problem from another point of view. We have already seen, excuse me. We have seen already that to people living in a world of only colors, that white light will be conceived as darkness, although it is fundamentally different from darkness. It may be said in general that when we cannot respond to a series of vibrations, we always get the impression of an absence of vibration, for consciousness is related to anything through vibration, and if our vehicle is unable to respond to a set of vibrations, the object which produces those vibrations must remain non-existent as far as we are concerned. We know as a matter of scientific fact that on both sides of the invisible spectrum there is the infrared and ultraviolet spectrum, but we cannot see it because our eyes cannot respond to vibrations of those wavelengths. Those realms of light are darkness to us, though they can affect us in other ways. Similarly, with sound, our ears can respond only to a limited number of vibrations of sound, and vibrations of greater or smaller wavelength mean only silence to us, although they can be detected, and utilized by science in various ways. The same holds true in the case of our mind. What is beyond the range of our mental comprehension appears meaningless and untrue to us. When we grow mentally, we not only begin to understand those things, but continue to see deeper meaning and significance in them. So we must be on our guard when we encounter these words like silence and darkness in dealing with the realities of the inner realms, and should not associate these words with the absence of any kind of reality, but only with the absence of response on our part. As a matter of fact, darkness and silence contain, even on the physical plane, far more visible light and audible sound. Far more than visible light and audible sound. This fact is brought home to us if we remember that on becoming blind and deaf, the visible spectrum also passes into the realm of darkness, and the audible spectrum into the realm of silence. The word ever darkness used for the absolute in occult literature therefore means only that the ultimate reality which it denotes is beyond the range of not only our senses and mind, but even beyond the range of experience of the still higher principles, like the Atma, which are within the experience of the highest adepts on our globe. From the many references we see in Hindu religion and occult literature, it appears that it is only the logos of a solar system who can have some kind of access to that impenetrable mystery, but nothing definitive on this point has been said. We have so far been considering the whole question from what we may call the qualitative point of view. Now let us dwell for a while on its quantitative aspect. And in dealing with the quantitative aspect of the problem, we cannot do better than consider very briefly the nature of the zero. The zero, as all those who have some knowledge of mathematics know, is the most intriguing, baffling, and unpredictable entity in the whole field of mathematics, with the exception of its counterpart, infinity. It is not possible to go here in detail into the extraordinary properties of zero and infinity, but we may consider a few facts which are relevant to our problem and which may throw some light on the concept of the absolute. Zero and infinity appear to be polar opposites. If we do go on increasing the quantity of anything, we approach the limit of infinity, but we never seem to reach it. If we go on decreasing the quantity, we approach the limit of zero, but never again seem to reach it. Between these extremes and unattainable limits are contained all possible magnitudes of the thing that we can imagine. This zero and infinity will thus be seen to be analogous to the point in space in geometry. Now, a wonderful thing about the ideal point in boundless space is that they appear to be the same ultimately and indistinguishable. If we imagine a point expanding ad infinitum, it will merge ultimately into infinite, boundless space, and then appear mysteriously again out of nowhere at its original position, and in its infinitesimal form. One can see why this it should be so. The point and boundless space are the two polar vestitures of the absolute, and cosmic rhythm, as we shall see later, is an eternal oscillation of consciousness between them. The properties of the zero and infinity are analogous to those of the point and space. An extraordinary property of zero is that it can contain within itself a quantity of any magnitude, provided that quantity is balanced by another quantity which is of equal and opposite in sign. You can write on a blackboard a figure of 100 digits indicating a huge amount of anything, and then if you write against it the same figure with the opposite sign, the two disappear together in a zero. Not only large figures, but you can then write a complex fraction large enough to cover the wall, and then if you write another complex fraction which is equal and opposite in sign, the two together disappear into the ultimate potentiality of a zero. The interesting point to note is not only that you can reduce anything to zero by introducing its equal and opposite, but also that the zero can contain both the plus and the negative quantities of any number and of any magnitude without being affected in any manner. In short, we may say, therefore, that the zero has the potentiality of containing within itself an infinite number of magnitudes, from the smallest to the largest, all perfectly balanced by each quantity being neutralized by an equal and an opposite. The significance of these extraordinary properties of zero can throw light on the concept of the absolute. They show mathematically how the existence of an ultimate reality within the possibility of containing an infinite number of potential systems in any number and of any magnitude, it is possible, provided that they are such that each separate item is balanced by its equal and opposite. We should note that there are no limits to that number, size, or quantity of the different items, provided each is balanced by its equal and opposite. We see also that this reality, in spite of the presence of these multifarious constant contents, can be a void containing everything and yet nothing. The consideration of these two simple facts, one quantitative and the other qualitative, derived from the field of science, shows us that the two principles of balanced integration and balanced summation give us a significant clue to the attributeless and contentless nature of the absolute, which has potentially all attributes and yet is without any attributes, which has everything in itself, which finds expression in an infinite series of manifestations and is yet without content. It is needless now to ask the questions of whether the absolute is a plenum or a void. The question has answered itself. The presence in an integrated form in the unmanifest of all equal and opposite principles is, in a potential state, naturally finds expression in the manifested universe in opposites called dvandvas, or pairs of opposites. Although it may not always be possible on account of the limitations and illusions which we live to correlate these opposites in every case, but they are seen everywhere and sometimes in a very striking form if we look at life intelligently and inquiringly. The active and passive functions of volition and cognition, involution and evolution, spirit and matter, subject and object, descent and ascent, positive and negative electricity, we are a few of these well-known pairs of opposites which may be traced back to their source in the unmanifest, where they remain perfectly balanced and potential, and from which they spring forth into active functioning when manifestation takes place. The presence of these opposite aspects of the unmanifest has been hinted at a very beautiful verse of the Ishvanashi Upanishad, like this. It moves, it does not move. It is further than the furthest. It is nearer than the nearest. It is within all this universe, and it is also out of this all. These pairs of opposite forces, processes, and properties are well known, and it is not necessarily to go in the question of their nature here. I would rather deal very briefly with a few pairs of opposites which are generally not recognized as such, but are implicit in the perfect balance, harmony, and wholeness of the absolute, in which the whole universe, manifest and unmanifest, is rooted. The recognition of these opposites is important not only from the academic standpoint, but also from the practical standpoint of view, because it can affect our attributes in life and be of help in the work of discovering that reality within ourselves. let us first undertake a question of great personal interest to many people, and on which there appears to be some confusion of thought among us. And I mean the question of Saguna Naguna Brahman, or, in other words, a personal and impersonal God. There is an impression prevalent among some people that occultism considers God as purely impersonal principle who is unapproachable in a personal capacity and is therefore not possible to establish any kind of personal relations with him in our inner life. Any attempt to regard him also as a personal God is frowned upon by these people and generally considered the result of anthropomorphic tendencies in man. Personal God does not necessarily mean a God sitting on a throne high up in the heavens. He is a God who is approachable and with whom personal relationships can be established, though he remains invisible, intangible. This impression has to some extent been created by those who, under the strong influence of Buddhistic teachings, have taken into account only one point of view and practically ignored its opposite. It is true that in the very core of the unmanifest, the absolute, the two aspects called Saguna and Niguna Brahman must be present in a balanced state, and is therefore impossible to establish any kind of individual relationship with that impenetrable, ultimate principle. But when we descend into the next lower level, the result of the primary differentiation into two, a positive and negative principle, called the Shiva Shakti in Hindu philosophy and Father Mother in the secret doctrine, this impersonality and inaccessibility should disappear, and it should not only be possible to establish a personal relationship with any aspect of that reality at any level, but this should be of tremendous help to us in the work of self-discovery. We shall deal in a subsequent chapter with this father-mother principle and its relation to the monads, and try to show that we should trace our birth as monads in spiritual origin to that ultimate dual principle, which is called the father-mother, not without reason. And we should not talk thoughtlessly, and if I may say so unscientifically, of having come out of the bosom of the Father, ignoring completely our spiritual mother, who must have, in those mysterious and unimaginable realms, a more important role to play in both giving us birth and bringing us up as monads, as her shadow in the physical world down here has. We are, however, not concerned here with the question of our origin, but with that of our relationship with that father-mother principle, or other lower manifestations of that principle in any form. It may be asked in all seriousness whether it is possible that the father-mother principle, which is the prototype of all fathers and mothers in the physical world, and thus the ultimate source of all parental love, tenderness, and care, can itself be devoid of all these attributes. Is it not more reasonable to suppose that it is the very fountainhead of that love which is even in its feeblest expression on the lower planes, provides the most exquisite and blissful experience to human beings? Nay, even to animals. If our spiritual parents are so impersonal and different to us, their children as individuals as it is sought to be made out, then why are they referred to us as the mother and the father? I think that this view about impersonality of God is the result of taking into consideration only one point of view and ignoring its opposite. The reality which lies at the basis of this universe of such vast magnitude and complexity must be impersonal in one of its aspects. But this very fact of its utter impersonality must be balanced by exact opposite, the fact that there must exist the most intimate and exquisite personal relationship between the divine parents and each individual soul. If he is utterly impersonal in one of his aspects, he must be utterly personal in its opposite aspect. If his love holds in his vast embrace the whole universe in an impersonal manner, then he must also hold each individual soul within his bosom as the most loved and cared for child, as no human mother can do. We must ponder carefully this idea that personality and impersonality are two opposite principles, and utter impersonality in its universal aspect must be balanced by utter personality in the individual aspect. It is upon this fundamental principle, derived from our concept of the absolute, that the idea of Saguna Brahman and the possibility of establishing the most intimate relationship of lover and beloved between the individual soul and the universal soul is based. And it is through the development of this relationship that the Bhakti Marga, or the path of love, is trodden. From the question of which is of personal interest and in which many must be interested, I now come to a rather impersonal question of philosophical significance, which is really what we call an anti-prashna, or ultimate question. Ati-prashna, beyond the comprehension of intellect. I mean the question of the why of the universe. Why was the universe created? And even if there is no creation and merely an alternation of Srishti, creation, and pralaya, dissolution, why this alternation? I think that we can turn again to the concept of the absolute for a partial answer to this question. It is obvious that the manifest and the unmanifest are two opposite states of being. Forthgoing and returning are two opposite processes connected to these two states of being, and one cannot be without the other, its opposite, in a balanced whole. If there is the ultimate unmanifest, there must also be the manifest, and if there is going forth from the unmanifest, there must also be a return to that state. So both the manifest and the unmanifest and their alternation at various levels must be inherent in the very nature of reality, and there is no question of any motive or exertion of will by any being in bringing about this alternation. There can be no ultimate reality without these two opposite aspects being inherent in it and producing the alternation of Srishti and Pralaya. We have taken here, for the sake of illustration, only these two implications of the concept of the absolute. We could take many other implications of this wonderful concept of integration and balance in the absolute and find that these throw some light on many problems in the field of philosophy which seem to baffle us. A state in which all possible principles, forces, etc., exist in perfect balance and equilibrium would not only be a void, as shown above, but would also be a state of perfect stability. According to modern conceptions of science, if such a state of equilibrium is disturbed in any way, that disturbance will be followed by such changes and adjustments as tend to neutralize the disturbance and tend to restore this original stable equilibrium. Are there any indications of the phenomenon in nature to show that there exists an ultimate reality at the core of the universe which is in perfect equilibrium and which tends to restore the equilibrium whenever and wherever it is disturbed in any way? There are many natural laws and phenomenon which points to the existence of perfect stability and equilibrium at the heart of the universe and the neutralization of any kind of disturbance by corresponding changes and adjustments. Let us consider a few such laws and phenomenon. The first of such generally observed laws which may be considered is the law of compensation. Every advantage in the life of an individual is balanced by a disadvantage. Every pleasure is compensated by an actual or potential pain. If we feel elated, we must feel depressed correspondingly. If we want to accomplish anything in a shorter time, we must spend energy at a faster rate. If we want things of the higher life, we must give up things of the lower life. It is because we can only get a very limited view of one life that we are not able to see clearly the law of compensation at work, but of its universal application. It is not in ordinary life that we can vaguely see the workings of this law. In the field of science, we also see its workings under different forms with mathematical exactitude. For example, there is the well-known Le Chatelier's principle in chemistry, according to which, if a system in equilibrium is subjected to any change, the system reacts in such a manner as to annul the effect of the change. In simple language, it means that if a system in chemical equilibrium is disturbed in any way, it reacts in such a manner as to undo the effect of the disturbance. In the field of biology, the development of immunity may be cited as an expression of this law. We also see that there can exist simultaneously a state of perfect balance and dynamic change, provided the change introduced is compensated by another change of an equivalent nature. But because there is generally a time lag and not possible to see all the resultant changes which may have taken place in a complex system in equilibrium, the law of compensation cannot be seen at work always. It will be seen from which has been said above that when any kind of impulse is given to any part of the universe, the whole of the universe reacts to it theoretically, although the reaction may be too feeble to be detected. The reaction is of such a nature that it tends to neutralize quantitatively the disturbance which have been created. This fact, which is recognized by science, shows the underlying unity of the whole universe, the manifest and the unmanifest, with its being alive or consciousness at every point. It is the development of this reaction to every impulse of whatever nature may be considered as the law of cause and effect in its widest sense. The original action or impulse is the cause, and the reaction is the effect. The law of karma is nothing but the law of cause and effect operating in the realm of human life and bringing about adjustments between an individual and other individuals whom he has affected by his thoughts, emotions, and actions. The adjustments which restore the equilibrium in nature are of two kinds. They are either immediate or delayed or follow a period of accumulation. Natural reactions in the realm of insentient matter are generally immediate, while those in the case of human beings who are conscious are more or less delayed. It is this accumulated reactions involving a large number of souls which pile up in the invisible realms and produce cataclysmic results like wars, pestilences, and revolutions. Take note. Which is symbolized by the drinking of poison by Shiva during the churning of the ocean in the well-known Puranic story. Poison of undesirable reactions once generated cannot be destroyed, but it can be held back and released in such a regulated manner at such an appropriate time that it does the least harm and does not paralyze or unduly hamper the evolution of individuals or humanity. Most thoughtful people are vaguely aware that there is a law of compensation underlying the phenomenon of life. But very few people realize that this law of compensation is not a law which governs only limited spheres of life or natural phenomenon, but the universal in its application. And it is universal and inviolable because it is the expression of the fact that a perfectly balanced ultimate reality, which we've referred to as the absolute, lies at the core of manifestation. It is because the universe is rooted in the absolute, and it is an expression of the absolute that compensation rules every sphere of life in nature. Like a gyroscope which has been tilted to one side and immediately tends to come back to its position of equilibrium automatically. In fact, the whole phenomenon of manifestation is the result of this tendency to regain equilibrium. The clock of the universe is wound up to a higher potential of existence by the divine will, and then the machinery of the manifested universe begins to run in order to regain the perfect harmony and equilibrium of the absolute which has been disturbed by this manifestation. That was chapter 1. And I need to go get more coffee. So, I'll be right back. I'm going to leave this on. Oh, shouldn't have come out. Why is this one opposite? It's cold outside. It's -4 degrees right now. Okay. But I got hot coffee. Chocolate in it. Because I'm a... Did you want to join? People keep requesting to join my live, but then I invite them and they don't join. So if you want to discuss this, we can, but then I'm going to continue. Chapter 2, Man, God of the Universe. The concept of the absolute. In dealing with the concept of the absolute, it was pointed out that such an ultimate principle must be a perfectly harmonious synthesis of all possible opposites, and must contain in an integrated form all principles, qualities, etc., which find expression in and are the basis of a manifested universe. Let us examine more fully these two ideas, namely the perfect neutralization of opposites and harmonious integration of principles and states. We shall take a few more important cases of neutralization of opposites, which produces a neutral state devoid of positive and negative characteristics, and consider some inferences of fundamental importance which may be drawn from the conception of such a neutral state. One such inference is that there must exist externally and eternally an ideal point in the unmanifested state of reality from which all kinds of manifestations start. The presence of such an eternal ideal point follows from several considerations. The primary differentiation of the one reality into a dual and polar Shiva Shakti Tattva assumes that the existence of another subtle Tattva functioning through a point or center, just as the existence of an ellipsoid assumes the existence of a sphere from the center of which the two foci of the ellipsoid separate, when the sphere degenerates into an ellipsoid as shown below. The same assumption becomes necessary from the consideration of the mathematical series of natural numbers given below: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. These numbers, as has been shown in another chapter, are the mathematical representatives of the fundamental realities in existence, and each of them corresponds to a particular level of reality which is related to both, one above and the other below it. In this series of numbers, 0 obviously represents the perfectly undifferentiated absolute, and 2 the Shiva Shakti Tattva. There is 1 between 0 and 2, and this must represent some aspect of reality coming between the two aspects mentioned above. The undifferentiated ultimate reality, or the absolute, which is a void and is called nirvesha, cannot have any center or particular point in it, as this will mean distortion and lack of uniformity. Yet, without such an eternal center, there can be no manifestation, as has been shown in another chapter. If such a center exists, it can only exist if it is balanced by an exact opposite. And now, what is the exact opposite of a point which can be neutralized or perfectly balance, or perfectly balance the point, and thus serve to maintain the perfectly undifferentiated state of the ultimate reality? Obviously, boundless infinite empty space. So the space to which reference is made in the secret doctrine is that aspect of reality which balances the point and thus maintains the perfectly undifferentiated condition required in that highest state. Both eternal ultimate space and eternal ultimate point are recognized in occultism and Hinduism. The eternal ultimate space, which is referred to as the container or vestiture of the ultimate reality, is called Maha Akasha in Hindu philosophy, to distinguish it from Sid Akasa, or mental space, which comes into existence on manifestation and serves as the medium of divine ideation. The eternal point, which serves as a center round which manifestation takes place, is called Mahabindu. and it is this point which by its primarily differentiation in the polar opposites produces the foci of the dual Shiva Shakti Tattva and contains within its unfathomable depths the mental centers of all solar logi and monads. Oh, hey, would you like to join my discussion? No. If we analyze the conceptions of mathematical point and mathematical space, we shall find that they are two opposites and limiting aspects of the same reality, which underlines the idea of magnitude and which may be referred to as extension. If we begin to contract a sphere of any size, it must ultimately be reduced to a point, which is a dimensionless ideal mathematical entity without magnitude, no length, breadth, or thickness. Similarly, if we go to the other extreme and begin to progressively enlarge the sphere ad infinitum, it must ultimately assume the form of formlessness, which is generally associated with boundless and infinite space. Space extending in all directions, without limiting boundary, and so attenuated that it is perfectly void. We have to assume that boundless infinite space must be the ultimate form of an expanding sphere, because it is only a sphere which on contraction to the utmost limit will give a point. Any other figure like a cube or a tetrahedron of any size on contraction to the utmost limit will not give a point, as can be seen quite easily without proof. The corners of such a figure will prevent it from contracting perfectly into a point. So the ideal point and ideal space are the two ideal limits of our conception of extension. The point being the limit in the direction of the infinitesimally small, and space being the limit in the direction of the infinitely large. This idea is of the utmost importance in our concept of the absolute, because it shows that the ultimate point and ultimate space must be the two opposite eternal forms or vestitures of the ultimate reality. That is to say, on the one hand, the absolute must have the form of space, and on the other that of point, both being opposite to each other, and therefore perfectly balanced, or neutralizing each other, and maintaining the voidness of that ultimate state. It is not a question of the absolute resting in space in its unmanifest state and appearing through a point in its manifest state, but existing through both simultaneously. This means that the unmanifest and manifest states of the absolute related to this space and point are not two alternative but coexisting states which exist simultaneously and eternally. They must be considered as polar states indissolubly bound together, and in the absolute, the eternal point, or the Leia center around which the manifested universe crystallizes on the lower planes, as it were, is eternally there. It is not that ideal point appears when manifestation is to take place. It exists eternally and simultaneously with the ultimate space, and is the vehicle of the Niguna Brahma, the reality which becomes between the absolute and the Shiva Shakti Tattva, and which corresponds to number one in the series of numbers referred to above. The conception of the absolute as a superintegrated state in which all principles, etc., are present in a perfectly harmonious condition is a necessary part of the philosophical concept of the ultimate reality. But on deeper thought, it will be seen only as one aspect of that transcendental state, for such a state must be purely static in nature, a state of frozen immobility, and it is difficult to imagine how this dynamic universe with movement everywhere and all the time can have its source in such a static reality. In order to clear up this doubt, we have therefore to turn to the other side of the coin and dwell on for a while on the dynamic aspect of this reality, which is the exact opposite of the static aspect and must necessarily exist as a complement of that aspect. This can be best referred to as cosmic rhythm, and we shall now consider this matter briefly. We find generally that a natural phenomenon of whatever nature, after it has started, goes on gaining momentum, but a time comes when it reaches its zenith and the reverse process of decay or declines begins to set in. This also gains momentum until the movement dies and either disappears from the realm of manifestation or reappears with a fresh impulse. This phenomenon takes place at all levels, from the level of the atoms which vibrate in a simple harmonic motion to the level of manifested systems which are born, grow, and reach their zenith, decline, and then disappear when pralaya takes place. The action of this almost universal law in the phenomenon of nature taking place in the manifested points to the presence of a periodic movement or rhythm in the unmanifest, which is like harmonic motion, going in opposite directions about a neutral point. Taking the phenomenon of manifestation itself as the highest reality, we find that there is alternate movement towards manifestation and dissolution in the eternal succession of Srishti and Pralaya. This should correspond in the realm of the unmanifest to an outward and inward movement about a neutral or laya center. By outward and inward movement is meant a movement in which there is alternate expansion and contraction about a center point, corresponding to the central fugal and central peel movements in mechanics. Excuse me. We have to remember that in these cosmic phenomenon, there is not only a reoccurrent periodical movement from Srishti to Pralaya, but also a movement from Pralaya to Srishti. Or in other words, a manifested system not only passes into the state of Pralaya after a period of active functioning, but also emerges from the state of Pralaya after a certain period and enters the phase of active functioning, which is called Srishti. Now, since Pralaya is a state of quiescence corresponding to the zero level, there must not be only a force which pulls back the manifested system into the state of Pralaya, but also a corresponding force which comes to the other side of the zero level, and after having passing the zero level, pushes the system, as it were, into manifestation. The manifested system continues to develop and grow until the outward wave is exhausted. The reverse process of decay and decline sets in. The system is pulled back below the zero level to the state of Pralaya, and the whole cycle is repeated over and over again. The zero potential of the Laya center cannot itself produce a positive thrust outwards towards manifestation, just as an organism which is dead cannot by itself revive and become alive again. A battery which is discharged cannot become charged by itself. A sun which has cooled off or is dead cannot become active again unless an external agency acts upon it, puts energy into it, and sets it going again. Since the ultimate reality is by its very nature an independent and self-sufficient reality, Nira Lama, there can be no other reality above it or outside it to produce such changes. It follows logically that we must look for such forces and the changes which they bring about within the ultimate reality itself. In other words, there must be an eternal periodic movement in the ultimate reality itself, which accounts for and automatically brings about these periodic changes of Srishti and Pralaya and all other periodic changes in the realm of manifestation. If the above view is correct, then the period of Pralaya for any system is not a period of sleep, a state of inactivity almost amounting to a moribund condition, which it appears to the illusion-bound intellect. It is a period in which the whole gamut of changes, or rather movements hinted at above, takes place behind the screen which separates the manifest from the unmanifest. We can see intellectually what happens when the wave of manifestation emerges from behind the screen. This is the birth of the universe or a smaller system, its growth, zenith, decline, and disappearance into the state of Pralaya. What next? What happens when the reverse wave recedes into the darkness of Pralaya? Does the whole thing become dead, frozen into immobility until the time of Srishti or creation comes again and a manifested system starts functioning? This cannot be, as life cannot come from death, energy from inertia. What happens beyond the screen in the darkness of Pralaya, it is darkness only to us who are on this side of the screen. It is the completion of the rhythmic movement of which only one half is intellectually visible on this side. The movement may be representative in the diagrammically as shown below. I think it's opposites, but the receding wave at the time of Pralaya descends into the unmanifest, reaching the nadir and then again returns to the zero level with a certain momentum which accounts for the new urge for Srishti at their period of Pralaya. The movement will be seen to be analogous to the movement of a pendulum in a clock. The oscillation of a pendulum. If we cover half of the lower portion of the clock, we shall see only half of the total movement of the pendulum. The movement behind the covered portion on the left will remain invisible to us. The phenomenon of manifestation is analogous to the visible movement of the pendulum on the right side. One interesting point to be noted in the movement of such a pendulum is that it can be continued to oscillate indefinitely by itself in a non-resistant medium like a vacuum, if the resistance at the point from which it hangs can somehow be eliminated. It will be seen from what has been said above that we can replace the ordinary perception regarding Shrishti and Pralaya by another conception which is breathtaking in its beauty, harmony, and philosophical grandeur. We replace the partial and unsatisfactory picture of the cosmic process in which a universe appears out of nowhere and disappears into nowhere, without any cause, with another picture in which we get a glimpse of the whole process, which is simple, harmonious, self-contained, eternal, and in harmony with the scientific laws with which we are familiar. The student should note that this kind of eternal rhythm in the unmanifest can account very satisfactorily for a number of universal phenomena in the realm of the manifest, such as the following. Number 1, periodicity, which seems to pervade the phenomenon of nature. The whole universe appears like a gigantic clock in which all the wheels of all kinds and sizes are revolving continuously and steadily in spite of the fact that energy is being spent and the machinery will ultimately stop. Number 2, phases which are accompanied by waxing and waning, ebb and flow in different spheres in the universe. And number 3, raising and lowering of energy in manifested systems and smaller organisms. These phenomenon are symbolized by the crescent moon and Damru in the symbology of Mahisha. As the idea of an eternal rhythm pervading the cosmos is extremely interesting both from the philosophical and scientific points of view, and serves to throw light on many doctrines of occultism and natural phenomenon, we shall go into it a little more in detail. Let us first see what it means and whether we can visualize it to some extent with the help of mathematical symbols and scientific analogies. The visualization of the ultimate reality as existing only in unlimited unbound space, or Maha-Akasha, or alternatively in a point called Mahabindu, is philosophically unsatisfactory. If it solely exists in unlimited unbound space, how are we to account for its manifestation through a point? Or, the point seems to be the very basis of all phenomena of manifestation from the lowest to the highest planes. If, on the other hand, that reality is to be conceived as existing in a point, how can we account for its existence as in Maha-Akasha? These two mathematical conceptions, the dimensionless point and the unbound sphere of infinite diameter, are, as shown above, two ultimate opposite conceptions in which this reality can be conceived to exist, but actually it can exist neither in one nor the other exclusively. This is really a trick of the intellect which conceives every reality or idea as a pair of opposites, or dvandva. Both these are really static and materialistic concepts, while reality by its very nature must be of the nature of consciousness and dynamic. The simple idea of cosmic rhythm reconciles and fuses together the conceptions of the dimensionless point and unbound space into an intelligible concept, which is in accord with modern scientific ideas. In this, the ultimate reality is conceived as an oscillation of consciousness in which it alternately expands to an unbound sphere of infinite radius and then contracts to an ideal point, thus sweeping through all the intermediate stages represented by concentric spheres of differentiant radii. This alternate contraction to a point and expansion to infinity brings out on one hand the dynamic nature of reality, and on the other shows how the ideal point and unbound infinite space both serve alternately as vestitures of that reality. Those who are familiar with modern scientific ideas will see in this alternate assumption of two extremes in opposite states an analogy with the state of resonance which is assumed in a natural phenomenon when it shows the characteristics of two opposite states simultaneously. The thing showing such opposite characteristics is considered to assume the two extreme states corresponding to these characteristics alternately and with extreme rapidity. Under these circumstances, the thing is neither one nor the other, but a dynamic equilibrium between the two. It should also be noted that this oscillation between the two ultimate limits means that all the intermediate states between the two extreme states are also passed through with inconceivable rapidity and are therefore contained in the overall state. So all possible states of existence are fused together, as it were, in one state. And this concept, therefore, affords us a new glimpse into the nature of reality and brings out the dynamic nature of the super-integrated state. The idea given above gives us a satisfying picture of the cosmic process, but it does not give a complete picture, for it deals only with the contraction and expansion in the positive realm of manifestation, corresponding to the process above the zero level in the figure given above. Without the corresponding contraction and the expansion in the negative realm below the zero level, there can be no balance in automatic movement, and it is difficult to account for the reversal of the impulse which results in bringing a universe into manifestation after a period of pralaya. A pendulum, if it is to swing continuously, must swing on both sides of the mean position. We cannot imagine it swinging only on one side of the mean position. What makes the manifested universe to start contracting after the impulse to expansion has exhausted itself? What makes it come out into manifestation after a period of pralaya? The clue to all these questions lies in combining the idea of expansion and contraction with the positive realm above the zero level with the idea of expansion and contraction in the negative realm below the zero level, thus making the whole cycle of the cosmic process complete, automatic, and analogous to similar cycles in the field of natural phenomenon. It is observed in the case of physical phenomenon that a moving body continues to move unless stopped by an application of a force in the form of resistance of some kind. A pendulum must continue to oscillate indefinitely unless it is stopped by some kind of resistance, however small this may be. This is due to tamas, or inertia. This tendency, which is inherent in nature, has been formulated in the form of definitive law of dynamics and is the basis of all natural phenomenon, which continues indefinitely like the movements of electrons in atoms or movements of planets in the solar system. It is really the expression of one of three fundamental gunas in which their harmonized condition are referred to as prakriti in Samkhyan philosophy. Let us look at the whole cosmic process a little more closely to understand the significance of the complete cycle. When the wave of contraction reaches the limit of the ideal point, it does not reverse its direction and start expanding again. It goes through the point and emerges on the negative side as a wave of expansion. In thus going through the point, it not only changes its direction and from a contracting wave is transformed into an expanding wave, but it also goes through a change in its nature which may be likened to that of turning a glove inside out. Let us follow the movements of the waveform by the means of a diagram. The contraction and expansion at the point where this repeated reversal in direction takes place may be represented by diagrammatically as shown in figure 4. We see in the figure how the wave changes its direction at the point 0. An expanding wave becomes a contracting wave or vice versa. In the illustration, the reversal at the point 0 has been shown within the limited range of a sector, but the student, by using his imagination, can easily visualize the whole process in terms of contracting and expanding sphere centered in the point 0. We can visualize in this illustration the reversal of the movement at the point 0, but not its reversal in the realm of infinity, when after expanding to infinity, the wavefront starts contracting again, both in the realm of the manifest and the unmanifest. But that such reversal does take place will be obvious if cosmic rhythm is a fact, and the cosmic process with its periodical alteration of Srishti and Pralaya is an automatic and eternal activity in the absolute, requires no initiatory impulse of creation or dissolution either from within or without. We cannot hope to understand or visualize these ultimate mysteries of existence except in a very vague and fragmentary manner, but we can sense intuitively their tremendous nature and awful grandeur. Mathematics can sometimes help us in these things by enabling us to symbolize these transcendental realities through mathematical diagrams. But these diagrams are mere symbols and cannot give us any comprehension of the modus operandi of the process, except in a very vague and general manner. In the present case, for instance, according to mathematics, if a wave started from a center begins to expand outward, it must again, after expanding to infinity, ultimately appear at the same center from within. This means that in the realm of infinity existing within the unmanifest, it has somehow been reversed in direction, though how we cannot visualize or conceive in any manner. If cosmic rhythm as envisioned above, lies at the basis of all periodic movements and changes in the cosmos, then the whole of the manifested state, in the positive sense as we know it, must have its negative counterpart, and we should have a negative manifested state which balances the positive manifested state, and thus maintains the void of the absolute. Corresponding to the basic realities which we find in the positive manifested universe, there should be their counterparts in this negative world. There should be negative time, negative space, negative matter, etc., though it is difficult to conceive what these constituents of negative world actually mean. Scientists have already begun to talk of antimatter, and those who travel in fast jet planes have had some kind of deal with negative time running backwards may mean. So the idea of there being negative time, space, matter, though it sounds fantastic, is not as absurd as it may appear on the surface. Veiled references to these negative worlds, negative time and space, are found in occult literature, but for some reason the truth about this negative state and manifestation, which exists behind the screen as it were, has been withheld from the general public for the present. Let us therefore not try to peer into these things for the time being. That the concept of cosmic rhythm is not a product of pure fancy and is within the realm of possibility, even according to modern scientific knowledge, will be clear from the following simple diagram, which illustrates the repeated reflection of light waves coming out of a point situated at the center of a glass sphere. The outer surface of the sphere is silvered, and so the inner surface serves as a spherical mirror and reflects the light waves which strike it along the radii of the sphere. The light rays advance along the radii of the sphere, and each ray, when it strikes the surface of the sphere, is reflected back among the same radius. All reflected rays pass through the center, and the contracting wave front is thus converted into an expanding wave front again. The whole process, as it has been pointed out in another context, is repeated ad infinitum with the speed of light if the sphere is perfect in shape, and the silvering is also perfect. In other words, under ideal conditions. It will be seen that in this simple scientific experiment we have also almost a perfect illustration of the idea of cosmic rhythm which we are considering. The wave front emerges again and again from its center, after being reflected back from the sphere wall and disappearing into the center. And these two processes correspond to Shrishti and Pralaya, or creation and dissolution. The only difference is that in this case the reversal, other than the one at the center, takes place at the inner surface of the sphere and can be seen, while in the case of the cosmic rhythm the reversal takes place in the dark realm of the unmanifest and cannot be seen or comprehended. It should, however, be remembered that it is only the ultimate reality, or Mahakasha, the vehicle of the ultimate reality, which is not only infinite but also boundless. A manifested universe, according to the occult doctrine, is a relatively limited phenomenon, although it appears stupendous and infinite to us. It is called Brahmanda, or the egg of the Creator, and it is probable that the impulse of cosmic rhythm are reflected from the inner surfaces of this Brahmanda, in a manner analogous to the reflection of light from the inner surface of a sphere, as illustrated above. On account of the very close relation of light and consciousness, it may be that the analogous physical phenomenon is merely a case of reflection of a reality according to the occult maxim, as above, so below. Solve et coagula. The conception of cosmic rhythm in the ultimate reality, or what may be called an eternal alternative expansion and contraction of consciousness between the point and the ultimate space, is in harmony with the phenomenon of nature in the invisible and visible realms. The rhythms observed in the universe in larger and smaller cycles, the contraction and expansion which alternate in different spheres and at different levels, the inflow and outflow of energy, the advances and recessions all point to the existence of a mysterious, all embracing cosmic rhythm at the very heart of the manifested universe. And as the manifested universe is derived from and based upon the unmanifest, they point to the source of these movements or alteration of states in the ultimate reality itself. To sum up what we have been discussing in the previous pages, we may also say that the concept of the absolute as an ultimate reality which is perfectly neutral, balanced, perfect whole, outside which nothing can exist, requires that this ultimate reality in its totality must be self-adjusting, requiring no external agency or cause to start any process like that of creation or dissolution. Being eternal, it should have no beginning or end, and all movements in it should be like movements in a circle. The ideas and illustrations given above will perhaps serve to throw some light on how such a state, such a self-contained and self-adjusted reality include both the manifest and the unmanifest which can exist and function, dispensing with the necessity of supposing that the absolute has to initiate certain movements or changes periodically, an idea which is philosophically untenable. It is this dynamic aspect of the ultimate reality or cosmic rhythm which is referred to as the dance of Shiva and is represented symbolically in the well-known form of Nataraja. It lies at the basis of all rhythmic harmonious movement which we find everywhere in nature. The rhythmic movements in the infinitesimal atom as well as the expansions and contractions of the universe are merely its reflections and expressions at the lowest level. The art of dancing is a futile effort to express the mystery of cosmic rhythm in the movements of the physical body. Still, dancing at its highest, when it truly is creative and takes the dancer and all those who witness it out of themselves in an ecstasy, it is in some mysterious manner a reflection and faint expression of that rhythm which underlies the universe. Such dancing by its very nature cannot be repetitive, based upon only the technique and memory, but must depend upon a temporary and partial rapport of the dancer with the rhythmic movements which are taking place eternally within the heart of the universe, and therefore within the heart of every human being. So it cannot be the product of a mere technique or even ordinary creativeness, though these are necessary. An inner attunement of the lower with the higher, in whatever manner this is attained, is a necessary condition. It may also be pointed out that this cosmic rhythm has been expressed as an alternate inward and outward movement of consciousness from the great center, embracing in its vast sweep the the whole cosmos. But this is so because we cannot conceive any movement in more than 3 dimensions as long as our consciousness is confined to this physical world of 3 dimensions. As a matter of fact, cosmic rhythm by its very nature must be a movement above the dimensions of space, but having the potentiality of producing any kind of rhythmic movement in the worlds of any number of dimensions. And it is thus that fundamental, integrated form of rhythmic movement which can be served as an inexhaustible source of an infinite variety of energy and movement. Well, reading for an hour. Thank you, Miss Morgan. Thank you.